We've got our new mock draft out from Ray Fittipaldo of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll talk about that here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're breaking down those picks and how they relate to a lot of the moves the Steelers have been making. Also, some of the things that Mike Tomlin's been saying in Arizona as the owner meetings kicked off this weekend. It's going to be a lot to talk about right here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can find all of our work at post-gazette.com. You can find this show Monday, Wednesday, Friday on all of our podcasting apps, especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of the daily content that comes out from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Again, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're joined today by Ray Fittipaldo, who's here in Pittsburgh while the owners' meetings are going on. But Ray, you released your new 7-round mock draft. Is this your 2.0 or your 3.0? I just got to be clear.
3.0. This one will be just looking at the moves they made in free agency, Chris. I think, it's coming into focus a little bit more. And then my final one, 4.0, will be draft week. So probably, we'll probably run that Monday or Tuesday of draft week. So, yeah, 3 down, 1 to go. And we'll see how it all turns out about a month from now. I think I saw online earlier today, Chris, 30 days until the draft, 1 month away.
That's crazy. We're counting down the days here, 30 days. It's time to ring out. But one thing the Steelers have made sure to do leading up to these 30 days was they solidified the interior of the offensive line. Isaac Samalo, Nate Herbig. They still got Dotson and Daniels and Cole. So they've gotten those positions locked up. Now they did sign a guy, LaRaven Clark, as a backup offensive swing tackle that they can place on either side of the offensive line. But he's not a guy that's going to be a starting caliber. And so that kind of puts in, if they really want to commit to the offensive line being a better unit this year, and a better unit not just this year but moving forward, they still need a young, dominant presence up front, and it seems like the place to get that would be offensive tackle now. And you have them in your new mock draft, your 3.0, taking Darnell Wright out of Tennessee with the 17th overall pick. And this is kind of the place where we've been for the Steelers with a while, right? Like, we've been wondering, would one of the top 3 guys fall to them? And if they didn't, would offensive tackle still be worthy of the pick? What makes you think that Darnell Wright is a great option there at 17th overall versus other positions they could go after?
He's had a good offseason, Chris. He was a little bit inconsistent at the Senior Bowl, but you look at what he did at the Combine, ran very well at the Combine. And, I think we talked about it last week or 2 weeks ago. There hasn't been a lot of talk about him moving to the left side, but I went back and did some reading on him. And he played left tackle in 2021, and then he basically moved back to the right side because that was what's best for, Tennessee last year. Their offensive line coach said that in a story, I think, last summer. So it's not that he can't play the left side. It's just that he did what was best for his team going back there as a senior. So we'll see how it plays out. Listen, there are still a lot of people who think he's a better right tackle than a left tackle, but just the fact that he might have that versatility, I think he could possibly come into play now at 17.
If he is a better right tackle than left tackle, what happens with the Steelers' offensive tackle situation? Because Chuks Okorafor has been the right tackle. They tried to put him at left tackle. He didn't work out. They put him back at right, and Daniel Moore stayed at left. And I think a lot of Steelers fans would agree that the left tackle position is the one that needs to be addressed more aggressively with Dan Moore versus Chuks Okorafor. If Darnell Wright is another right tackle, what happens with the left tackle position? Does he win right tackle and Chuks bump to left, or does Dan Moore hold that spot? Or do they say, Darnell, you got to be the left tackle? We already got right tackle locked down.
Right. I think if they made that move, they would let him come in and figure out where he fits best, right? That's what they always do. They don't want to pigeonhole guys into saying you're going to be one position and in one position only. But if it did turn out that he was better suited to play the right side, then I think they would give every opportunity to Chuks Okorafor to try to figure it out on the left side, and then Dan Moore would be your swing tackle. But if that didn't work out, and let's be honest, Chris, that didn't work out in training camp 2021, then you would have a big decision to make. Would Chuks Okorafor be a very expensive swing tackle, or of course, would they move on? Would they take a $6 million dead cap hit and just go from there? So those are some of the things that are in play there. That's why I think it's more likely that they would take like a Skoronski or a Jones or a Johnson, because they are definitely left tackles and can play left tackle in the NFL. So I'm just thinking, hey, if the top 3 left tackles are off the board, if those corners are off the board that you want, if Lucas Van Ness is off the board, what do you do, right? I mean, those are some very real scenarios that could unfold there, and they're going to have plan B, plan C in place in case all those guys aren't there for them at 17.
No, I agree, because I mean that's one thing that you kind of have to be aware of, is that offensive tackle is a very sought after position. It's a position that if you don't strike at it in a draft, you're paying a lot of money for it in free agency, as we're seeing some of these guys fly out, and get humongous deals. The Steelers, not signing any of those guys because I think their plan is to draft those guys and maybe make those guys the pillars. And they kind of already have in Chuks Okorafor. They've committed to him financially for at least another year, but having a guy on the offensive line who you'd have under a rookie deal, and if you could get him in the first round, have him under a rookie deal for potentially 5 seasons, that could be a huge part of it. And if that guy could be the rookie of the group and be a very talented rookie that works with a veteran group that they've assembled through the free agency over the past few years, and a couple of the draft picks, and of course with Chuks and with Dan Moore, you get a chance to build this line, and then from there kind of continue to build through the draft and make your next generation's offensive line the way they did in the early 2010s that lasted for pretty much that whole decade.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one more thing, a lot of people, and I think I'm starting to lean this way too, but, slamming the door on a guard or center coming in the early rounds of the draft now. I just want to point out, John Michael Schmitz was in town on Friday. He was in for a top 30 visit. Osiris Torrance, as of last week, was still scheduled to come in for a visit. So, they weren't afraid to upgrade in free agency. I'm just saying, I'm just putting it out there. If they really love one of those guys in round 2, not round 1, but round 2, let's leave that door open just slightly.
Just slightly. I think that'd be very interesting, especially at its center position, which, like guard, they have a lot of guards right now, but I mean, right now, J.C. Hassenauer is still in the free agency pool, I believe. I don't believe he's been signed anywhere. Right. Kendrick Green is, I think, your currently only on-roster option behind Mason Cole. And so as much as they've talked about depth, getting another center would be an interesting option for them there. And so I do think the door could be open there. I just think that as far as center was never an option in the first round because there's just no prospects like that this year. And offensive tackle makes a lot more sense there for the guys who are available. But it would be interesting to see if they were able to get an offensive tackle and still found a way to get a center that they'd really like to kind of back up Mason Cole or challenge him for the starting spot in this season or the season after that. But I want to get to some of your other picks here, Ray, because you addressed a lot of different positions: defensive line, cornerback, outside linebacker, tight end. We'll get through all of those in just a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Don't go anywhere. But first, we'd love to talk to you guys about one of our new great sponsors, and that's GameTime.co. If you're out there ever trying to buy tickets for a big event, it shouldn't be stressful, even if it's coming at the last minute. That's what Game Time is here to do. It makes the process fast and easy to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, theater events, anything that you can get tickets in your area. GameTime.co is here to help you out. They'll find you killer deals that'll save you a lot of money on last minute tickets. So if you're sitting there thinking at the last second, oh, I'd love to go to that event, but you see all the prices are jacked up on all the other sites, you can see on GameTime.co the prices are always the best price. They have a best price guarantee, so you can stop stressing over the tickets that you weren't able to get far in advance and still find a way to have fun at the events that you want to get to. The Game Time app allows you to book tickets at the last minute if you didn't plan that far out. And I don't know about you guys, that happens to me all the time. I see something and I'm like, oh man, I didn't know that group was in town and I'd love to get a ticket there. But sometimes those last minute tickets are very expensive, but not on GameTime.co. They'll help you find the best tickets available. So go to GameTime.co today for all your exclusive flash deals on football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, anything you can think of that got tickets. GameTime.co has. And again, the Game Time guarantee means you'll always have the best price. If you find tickets that are in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download with the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code PITT, P-I-T-T, all capital letters, for $20 off your first purchase. Or you can go to their website, gametime.co. That's GAMETIME.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code PITT for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo breaking things down on Ray's 3.0 mock draft that he's released on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can find that right now at post-gazette.com. Go to the sports section, and it's breaking things down. Now, again, they picked Darnell Wright, or Ray had the Steelers picking Darnell Wright in the first round with the 17th overall pick. But now, with the 32nd overall pick, the first pick of the second round, you have them going cornerback, which is another position that I think a lot of people have been pointing to this offseason. You have them getting Kelly Ringo of the Georgia cornerback, who's had an interesting path to get to this point, because leading into the season, he was one of the guys that was projected that could become one of the top cornerbacks of the draft class. He didn't have that kind of a season. His offseason, has been decent, but not, elite. So as far as what he's been able to put up numbers wise, but he's still a guy that a lot of people have a lot of excitement about, and they think he has a lot of upside as a young cornerback. How would he fit into the Steelers secondary that, they've added Patrick Peterson. They kept Levi Wallace and the Keller Witherspoon. Is he that outside corner that could start, or is he a guy that's going to have to come up and learn for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, he might be a guy who has to learn for a little bit, but I think he could come in and contribute right away, and I don't think it would be long, Chris, before he would earn a starting position. And kind of the nice thing about the Steelers now, the way they're set up, they finished the season last season with Levi Wallace as a starter, so that that could very well happen again. So if you're talking at 32, we're saying Joey Porter Jr., Devin Witherspoon, and Christian Gonzalez are off the board, obviously, top half of the first round. Those second tier of corners, Deonte Banks would be in there. Emmanuel Forbes would be in there, right? So what I was thinking with Ringo is he's got that. He's big. He's 6'2", 6'3". He's fast, okay? But he also fits the Steelers model of being able to help in run support and not having any deficiencies there. So when I just looked at Forbes versus Ringo, I think it's like 30 pounds difference. I think, Ringo's like in that 205 range, and Forbes is down like in that 166, 170 range. Now, Forbes was very productive, had a ton more interceptions, but when you look at it, I think, Ringo would be the more typical Steelers pick. Listen, if they want to go a different way, they can go Forbes there. If Banks is still there, they can go Banks, although you see Banks a lot in the first round now. So, we just ran off like 5 or 6 names of corners in the top 32 picks. Given what I've heard about this class, Chris, I don't think it would be out of question that all 6 of those guys, would be off the board or close to being off the board by the time the Steelers did pick at number 32 at the top of the second round.
It's always tricky because you can look at that and you can say, man, there's this player's going to go here, this player's going to go there, and then draft day comes, and then the pecking order that we talk about all off season is wrong, and because the GMs, there's even just one GM sees it differently, and they take a corner at one point or at any position at one point, and they're like, "Whoa, we didn't have that guy going that early," and then it jumbles up what everyone thinks about that position. And going over just what guys were able to do. You're talking about Deonte Banks. Deonte Banks, the Maryland cornerback, the one of 2 Maryland cornerbacks. Jacorian Bennett's the other one, but Banks is definitely the one that everyone's looking at as the earlier pick. Deonte Banks, the guy that really helped himself in the combine because he looked like an athletic freak. He had a 4.35 40-yard dash. His 42-inch vertical was the best of the group. His 136-inch broad jump was the second best of the group. So this is a guy who he's an athletic freak, but he has a little bit more polishing to do, at least in my opinion. Kelly Ringo, though, again, not that far off in a lot of respects as far as the speed component. He ran a 4.36 in the 40-yard dash, so He's got the speed. His vertical wasn't as high at 33.5, so a little bit lacking there, and not as explosive, but he's a guy that's used to using his length. He played in that physical defense at Georgia. There's a lot of reasons to like that and how he could fit. And like you said, the Steelers could use an outside corner who could be in the mix and maybe not necessarily start right away, but be someone that they can deploy out there and who can learn from a Patrick Peterson and a very veteran cornerback room that they've already assembled.
Yeah, but they get at some point, Chris, whether it's at 17, 32, 49, at some point they have to get that future long-term starter because, as you know, Peterson is 33 and Levi Wallace and Ahkello Witherspoon are both entering the final years of their contracts.
Absolutely. How much do you talk about Emmanuel Forbes? How much does slot corner do you think play into this? Guys who could play. I know Arthur Maulet's kind of been that guy, but if the Steelers are about turnovers, Arthur Maulet, kind of like, well, Mike Hilton did contribute more in turnover department, but like having a real cover slot option there, and I guess Brian Branch would be an option in that department as well.
Right.
How much does that weigh versus finding the next outside cornerback guy?
I think outside corner is the number one goal in this draft for the Steelers. But you're right, Chris. I mean, other than Arthur Maulet, there's not another slot corner type of guy on this roster. And, it's interesting looking at this draft. There's a lot of big corners in this draft, but there's not a lot of highly talked about slot corners. Brian Branch would probably be the first guy that comes to mind when you're talking about slots. And a lot of times slots don't get taken in round one. I think Branch might be the exception this year. So when you're talking slot guys, I think you're probably talking second round or after, probably even after, third round or after. But there's just not a lot of highly graded guys with that skill set in this draft. So you do have a lot of big guys. You got a lot of guys who can run in this draft. That's why I think outside corner is probably more in play, but there's no doubt the Steelers need help on the inside as well, and specifically, as you mentioned, the cover guy that they could pair alongside Arthur Maulet.
Now, two other picks that you made here, defensive front wide. You got Mazai Smith, the interior defensive lineman out of Michigan. He would kind of be a guy that could help them on the interior, help with run stuffing and getting after the quarterback. He's a stronger option there, but then you also have them double dipping in that area, maybe not the interior defensive line, but an edge rusher in Byron Young out of Tennessee. Getting two guys up front to bolster the defensive front when there's other needs on the board, I think would be interesting. But the Steelers have talked about wanting to be stronger up front, and they're getting pretty old, especially the interior defensive line. Ogunjobi was re-signed. Cam Hayward's still there. They do have Lamarvin Leal, but we've been talking about the need of finding, whereas they need to find the next corner of the future, they still need to find the defensive lineman of the future, considering some of the guys they have on their roster right now.
Yeah, listen, Mozzie Smith is, he played nose guard at Michigan, but the only reason that he's getting talked about is a second-round pick. And let's be honest, there are some people who saying he's moving up so quickly he can go in the first round. We'll see how that plays out. But the reason he would get drafted higher than people expect is because of his athletic profile. And people would think, okay, yes, he could play nose guard for us, but he's so athletic he could bump out and play three technique. And he could also do that very well, line up over a guard and, maybe add some value as a pass rusher, which honestly he didn't do at Michigan. But given his athletic traits, there's really no reason that he couldn't perform those duties in the NFL. So, that would be an interesting pick. Again, like when you get out of the first round defensive lineman, early second round defensive lineman types, like the ones you see are like Siaki Ika, from Baylor. Smith from Michigan, more guys who were more run stuffers, kind of like in that middle second round range, more so than guys who would get after the passer. I mean, I think that's just the way this draft is going to unfold. I think Brian Brzee from Clemson's probably going to be late round one, maybe early round two. It's a good draft for a defensive lineman, Chris, but it's not a very deep draft. And I think that's why a guy like Smith and Ika would be in play for the Steelers at 49.
Certainly, I want to talk to you more about Young in a second as far as the edge rusher component and what might be coming for Alex Highsmith, his future with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Also, you have them taking a tight end in the fourth round. I want to talk about that after the signing of Zach Gentry, because this is a really good tight end class by all measures, and everyone who talks about it. So we'll talk about that all in a minute here, right here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, with Ray Fittipaldo. We'll be right back. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo breaking things down for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and Ray Fittipaldo's 3.0 mock draft that you can read at post-gazette.com with the Pittsburgh Steelers and who they take. Now, again, you had them with their second round pick at 49th overall, taking Mazi Smith from Michigan. But then your third round pick was Byron Young, the edge rusher out of Tennessee. This would be an interesting pick here, Ray, because we still don't know what's going to happen with a few things here. A few things up in the air. One, the Steelers reportedly bringing in Bud Dupree for a visit to see if anything would happen there. Of course, bringing back Bud Dupree, a former first-round pick who signed you with a huge deal with the Tennessee Titans. Didn't work out because of his injury history. I think he only got like 4 sacks in 2 years. That's not exactly what they wanted, so now he's back on the market. But then also with Alex Highsmith, he enters the final year of his rookie deal. And the question is, do they pay Alex Highsmith? They're already paying TJ Watt a boatload of money. And this is, I guess, the opportunity to pay players like Alex Highsmith when you're not paying for a franchise quarterback anymore. But is that the option here? Do you think the Steelers are closing in on that? And if they're drafting a guy in edge rusher, is that a sign that maybe they don't sign Alex Highsmith to a long-term deal? Or is it just that this is Andy Weidel, this is what they want to do, they want to have that deep rotation of athletic edge rushers who can put pressure on the quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think they would love to have Alex Highsmith under contract for more years beyond this year. But traditionally, the Steelers don't address those types of contract issues in March or April. They're more likely to attack that during OTAs and minicamp and even into training camp. So, I don't, you mentioned Bud Dupree, and I think Bud Dupree is coming in for a visit. If he comes in for a visit, I think it's all about just passing a physical, and, I think he would be signed. But anything you do with a free agent at this point, Chris, is going to be for 1 year. You saw that with Zach Gentry on Saturday. He's 1 year. That's not going to stop the Steelers from taking a tight end in this draft, especially when it's such a deep class, such a talented class of tight ends. And the same holds true for edge rusher. If Bud Dupree decides to come back, he comes back for 1 year. He's not going to want to tie himself up into a longer deal. And I think they can go ahead and get a guy in the 3rd or 4th round who could come in and, rotate and maybe be a guy that could potentially help them in 2023. And if not, then you got your number 3 guy in place for 2024 when a guy like Dupree, would move on. So, these contracts that were signed the first week of free agency, Holcomb 3 years, Sayamalu 3 years, those guys are starters, right? Yeah. Zach Gentry's not a starter. Bud Dupree wouldn't be a starter.
Right.
Anything they do now will not prevent them from doubling down and taking other guys at their same positions in the draft.
So you have them taking a tight end from Zach Gentry's alma mater, Luke Schumacher of Michigan, 6'5", 251. What does he bring to the table that you think would make him a really good option at the tight end position, just so Steelers fans can get a sense of like, ooh, who is this guy that would be added to the tight end room? And what would this do for Connor Hayward? Because he's kind of been the third string tight end. He was the third string tight end for the team last season.
Right. So this would keep the Gentry model, right? A good run blocker would add some value in the passing game. Probably, to be honest, a little bit more upside than Zach Gentry in the passing game. But he would still come in. His number 1 job would be a run blocker. I've thought about it, Chris. There's some very good pass-catching tight ends in this class. I just don't know if the Steelers are going to go to that model and just have two strong pass-catching tight ends. I think what they're doing on the interior, they want to run the ball. I think getting that solid number 2 tight end, not only for this year with Gentry, but getting that guy for a future, would be a good move. And as far as Hayward goes, I wouldn't really do anything to Hayward's spot. Hayward is a tight end. He goes to the tight ends rooms for meetings, but he's more of an H-back. And depending on what they do with Derek Watt, he could find himself in the running backs room a little bit more this year if they have to add fullback to his duties, even though they don't run a lot of fullback sets. So if you look at the way they used Connor Hayward last year, there was that touchdown against the Falcons where he ran down the seam, but late in the year he was taking jet sweeps. He was kind of like, he's that smaller tight end that's kind of like a hybrid, and he wouldn't be in consideration for that blocking tight end role. So I really don't think a 4th round pick would have any impact on his role whatsoever. He'd still be very involved. I just think maybe it would be more involved as a traditional H-back more so than a tight end.
No, I agree. I think that's more of the thing. That's the whole thing. When they signed Connor Hayward, or not, so they drafted Connor Hayward late last year. I think that was part of the thing, was that his size doesn't lend him to be a full-time tight end, because he's just not tall. He doesn't have the length to kind of play tight end in the traditional sense in the NFL. But his athleticism, the way he catches the ball, the way his physicality, his willingness to kind of do all the dirty work, that's all attractive, and that makes him an interesting chess piece for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think that's why they'd want to keep him. But again, if they drafted another tight end, like you have them drafting Schoonmaker in the 4th round, I think that that's an interesting option that says, okay, cool, you have 3 official, like built the way you want type of tight ends, guys 6'4", 6'5", huge guys that can play there, make some catches down the field. But then you can still float around Hayward as sort of the Derek Watt role, as far as, hey, come in, play the occasional fullback role, throw your body in there to be a lead blocker for Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, or leak out and catch some passes from Kenny Pickett, because like you said, he did make a couple of those plays towards the end of the season. So I do think it's interesting. I thought that tight end going, before they brought back Gentry, because they hadn't, brought him back or made any moves in free agency, I was wondering if tight end would be a 2nd round move, because there's a lot of, like you said, this is a really good tight end class, and they could get a guy like Michael Mayer of Notre Dame, or Darnell Washington of Georgia, or Dante Kincaid. There's a lot of options there at the top of the board. Schoonmaker, though, one of the examples of how deep of a tight end class this is, and sometimes you could take advantage of that by not spending too high at that position and still getting a player of quality.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And remember, this is a 1-year deal for Gentry.
Mm-hmm.
They created competition at Garden Center. And I think we all believe that Kendrick Green probably isn't going to be on this roster in 2023. There's nothing to say that Zach Gentry, after signing a 1-year deal with little guaranteed money, would also have to be on this roster, right? So if a 4th round pick would beat him out, hey, Zach Gentry, he'd be a guy that might be cut in training camp. Also, Chris, there's injuries, there's training camp, all this. You're always looking to build depth and to have extra guys and good competition. And competition matters. Mike Tomlin said it yesterday at the owners' meeting. They wanted to create more competition on the interior of their offensive line. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if they created more competition at other spots, including tight end, this spring and this summer.
That being said, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do the Steelers find a way to bring in another guy like Bud Dupree in free agency, or a receiver as well? Because Steven Sims was signed to another team in free agency. Right. That's another position that they could find a way to add at.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Chris, anything you would add, like a receiver, I think would probably be like a 1-year deal in free agency. I had them taking a receiver in the 7th round in my latest mock draft. They could take one like in the top 4 rounds, but I just don't get that sense. And I know everyone says, well, the Steelers always do that. Well, this is a different regime, and I think Andy Weidel wants to build this team a certain way. Listen, I could be mildly surprised. They could end up taking one of the top 4 rounds. I just think if they're going to add one, maybe just add some competition for Calvin Austin, Anthony Miller in the slot, and just maybe take that route.
No, I hear you on that. And also, I think it's important to know, even beside the obvious, regime change of it being Omar Khan and Andy Weidel and what they're putting into, this is a different era for the Steelers. Back then, when they were drafting guys in the 2nd and 3rd round, like 5 straight years in a row, Ben Roethlisberger was their quarterback, and it was because they were trying to give him more weapons to fill out that receiver room that was led by Antonio Brown, and all the years that they were trying to add to that group without having, so that they wouldn't have to pay for big money for wide receivers while they were paying their quarterback and their wide receiver and a couple offensive linemen really big money. So I'm right with you that it's a little bit different this time around, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see those differences there. And I don't think it signifies that their values overall changed. I do think that they recognize that running the football is becoming a bigger thing in the NFL, and that with a young quarterback, you kind of need to have that kind of a run balanced look in your offense to kind of make things easier for them. But I also think it's because they're recognizing the skill sets that they have on their roster right now, and the best way to build with that right now isn't necessarily just add all the wide receivers in your draft class, get stronger in the trenches, control both sides of the line of scrimmage, and make it easier for your quarterback to not have to carry your team the way that maybe a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen might.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, Chris. The league is taking maybe a little bit of a different turn. We've seen it slowly build here with running games getting stronger. I think the Steelers finally got on board with that last year in Kenny Pickett's first year. Kenny Pickett's going to take a lot of steps as a playmaker, as a passer in year 2. But I think as you look at the way this entire 53-man roster is structured, defense is going to lead this team, running game, and then Kenny Pickett making plays when he has to. I don't think that's going to change in year 2. I think Kenny Pickett's going to get better, but I think the running game is still going to be a very, very big part of this football team going forward in 2023.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about that as the NFL draft gets closer. 30 days away right now. Crazy enough. You want to get all that coverage, go to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Ray Fittipaldo has his 7th round Steelers mock draft, his 3.0 version, where he has some interesting pick that we just broke down here. But if you want to read all the breakdowns, go there right now. You can also check out our coverage of the NFL owners meetings, where we have people on hand right now getting ready to talk to the Steelers front office. Mike Tomlin spoke on Sunday. We'll see what else gets said at owners meetings as we go throughout the week, and we'll keep talking about that right here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. You can find this show Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette with our podcasting platforms, or on our YouTube page that you can, if you enjoying this video, like this video, subscribe to this channel to get all of these episodes, as well as all the content released here. We have daily content coming out, whether it's Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, Pitt, Penn State, college. We have all the coverage right here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'll be back Wednesday breaking more things down right here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.